Are there any names or acronyms for your discipline?
Orientation and mobility specialists are sometimes referred to as O&M specialists. Also, they're referred to as O&M instructors or mobility instructors. Something that you commonly see after someone's name is COAMS, which is an acronym that stands for Certified Orientation and Mobility Specialist.
What is orientation and mobility, and what kinds of services do you offer a student who is deaf-blind?
Orientation and mobility is about life skills for people who are visually impaired. It addresses independent movement, independent travel in a variety of environments. Orientation and mobility emphasizes the use of the residual senses, and it applies techniques and strategies and tools to help a person become as independent as they can be and to travel with as much safety, efficiency, and gracefulness as is possible. One of the more well-known tools of orientation and mobility is the long cane, which can provide a student with protection and an exploration tool to reach out into the environment. Orientation and mobility specialists also promote the use of vision whenever there is residual vision to be used. We offer a tool such as a monocular, which is a distance vision aid for seeing things in the distance within the community. Activities of daily living are a very big part of orientation and mobility. And this also ties into vocational skills, pre-vocational skills. Learning how to care for oneself and do things for oneself really is a pre-vocational skill. And in order to be as independent as one can be, you really need to have the ability to ask others for help when there's a visual impairment. There will always be situations in one's life when they have a visual impairment in which they need to ask for assistance. In connection with that, something that I think is very important for students who are deaf-blind is the use of social skills and communication skills within the community. I think that one of the great benefits of orientation and mobility for a student who's deaf-blind is the multitude of experiences that are offered within the community to practice these social skills and interactions with people other than whoever it is that they're the most used to being with.
Is there a difference between what you were trained to do and what you actually do for students who are deaf-blind?
I think that the orientation and mobility program that I went through prepared me well for working with students who are deaf-blind because they left us with the message that you need to look at the individual. You need to look at where that individual is functioning and go from there. One of the things that I was not prepared for, based on my education, was sign language. Sign language is not something that's included in the teacher training program for orientation and mobility specialists. Another thing that is not included unless you are duly certified as orientation and mobility and teacher of the visually impaired is Braille. So those are two things that in my experience I have used that were not part of my training.
What does an orientation and mobility specialist bring to a student's educational team?
Orientation and mobility specialists can contribute a variety of things to the educational team. One of those things is a knowledge of how different visual diagnoses impact a person's functioning and their independent travel abilities. Also, the fact that we've had experience in teaching and learning the skills associated with independent travel. We bring an understanding of how the skills are built upon each other so that a person can travel confidently and independently. Because there is such diversity among students who are deaf-blind, the way in which orientation and mobility services are provided can vary. Sometimes Services are offered on a consultation basis and other times on a direct service basis. It really depends on the unique needs of the individual. Orientation and mobility services vary somewhat depending on the age of the child, but the primary difference has to do with the environment that you teach in. More often, the student who's an infant or a preschooler is being served either in the home or in some kind of a center. And as time goes by, we tend to be moving out into the community more. Perhaps the student's yard would be the next instructional classroom area, and then we move into the community.
How do you communicate with other team members, and why is this so important?
Communication between members of the educational team is very important. If activities and goals that are being worked on in mobility are not discussed or shared with others, then there would be no reinforcement of these activities by family members and other team members. So much more progress is noticed when everybody is doing the same types of things with the student. I like to make home visits as a regular part of my instruction because I find that, particularly with students who are deaf-blind, because they have unique communication issues, that it's really, really important for me to be able to reinforce things that matter to that student. So by becoming familiar with what goes on in the student's home, who the members of the family are, what does the student like to talk about at home, it really makes my job more interesting and more meaningful, and there's more progress seen with the student. One way that I like to communicate with families is by leaving messages regularly. Cell phones and email are very helpful. But it's also important to model what it is that's being done, because specific orientation and mobility skills need to be shown in person. So I like to invite families and paraeducators and teachers to go into the community on mobility lessons. It can be really fun because it's a social event usually, and the student really enjoys that, having all their teachers or family and teachers together at the same time.
Are there any misconceptions about your discipline you would like to clarify?
Orientation and mobility is sometimes confused with occupational therapy. Perhaps because they both have an acronym that's 2 letters, O&M, OT, and because orientation and mobility has the word mobility in it, and they've heard occupational therapists refer to mobility from the orthopedic perspective. I think there are misconceptions about what orientation and mobility instructors do. I think that sometimes people see us out following a student or with a student in the community, perhaps making purchases at grocery stores, buying things at restaurants, and I don't think they're really sure or that they really understand that it's a lesson and that there are skills being taught throughout this whole process.